Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 4 and will be presenting the topic of social contract in Malaysia, the importance and challenges in honoring the social contract. So this is our group members. Without further ado, let's move on to the overview of this presentation. This presentation will cover 4 subtopics, which are introduction, importance and advantages, challenges and ways to overcome, and also conclusion. So for introduction, I will guide you through these 3 methods. What is social contract in Malaysia? Social contract in Malaysia can be defined as an unwritten agreement regarding rights and responsibility between state and its citizens. In another word, what had been agreed by the government to the citizen of that country regarding their rights that should be upheld for the stabilization of that nation. The purpose of that contract is to bind all the communities in Malaysia for a purpose of creating a multiracial nation that is stable and harmonious. This purpose can be seen in the establishment of the social contract itself. Social contract in Malaysia established when British demand to grant citizenship to the non-Malays when the Malay state want to seek for independency. Then, UMNO, MCA and MIC agree to grant citizenship in exchange that the non-Malays should acknowledge special position of the Malays as the indigenous people, Islam as the state religion, Malay reserve land preservation, position of Malay rulers and Malay custom, Malay as a national language, and also quota for Malayan civil service. One of the methods that we use in doing our research in this topic is by way of Google Form. As we can see on the screen, we have the question on, do you think social contract is fair enough for everyone? From the pie chart, we can see 50% of the respondents say that social contract is fair, while other 50% said otherwise or still in doubt with the social contract. So one of the respondents said that he or she believed that so-called special position that is within the social contract must be reduced because the Malays becoming dependent on government for sustainability. This is her opinion. So in our discussion, we will see the important advantages, challenges in social contract and ways to overcome it.
Why is the social contract so important to the country? Beyond the federal constitution, Malaysia operates on 5 social contracts. The first involves a delegation headed by the late Tunku Abdul Rahman with Tun H. Ashley and Tun Sambatan Intau to urge London to consent to a peaceful transfer of power that led to the independence of the nation on 31st August 1957. Next, the second social contract includes the importance of Rukun Negara. The third social contract requires the agreement and vice versa to honor the royalties. The sultans, including the governors in states like Sabah and Sarawak, must in every way be able to preserve the rich diversity in different states to the best of their ability. The fourth social contract involves a colourblind affirmative action in the form of national economic policy between 1979 to 1990. According to Professor K.S. Jono, the final social contract will be Wawasan 2020, where all races ideally see themselves as Malaysians with equal wages and a comfortable social security net to cushion their old age retirement and healthcare benefits. All of those social contracts that I have mentioned plays a vital role in ensuring peace and harmony. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad in his blog stated that the social contract is aimed at establishing a prosperous and harmonious multiracial community. He also added that the spirit of the social contract must be regarded as incompatible with any element that will cause instability and lead to the conflict between races. In 13 May 1969, partly as a result of the emerging uneven economic growth since British colonial days, Peninsular West Malaysia experienced its worst race riot among its constituent ethnic population of Malay, Chinese and Indians. The incident had jeopardized Malaysia's social security. This was due to it was suspected suspected that the incident resulted from intense politicking in third general election, particularly with regard to Article 3 on Islam as the religion of the Federation, Article 152 on Bahasa Melayu as our national language, and Article 153 on the special status of the Malays and Bumiputra. In the interest of national unity, the government enforced a social contract between various ethnic groups as a remedial measure. As such, it was necessary to recognize that the incident of 13 May 1969 had severely affected the efforts of the government to handle race relations and nation building. For instance, Tun Abdul Razak Hussein dedicated his position as a Prime Minister from 1971 to 1976 to tackle the problems of national unity, socio-economic inequality, and difference as well as political turmoil. He then declared the Rukun Negara or National Doctrine on 31st August 1970 to restore the fragile democracy, national unity, and political stability of Malaysia. In 1971, through an affirmative action initiative introduced by NOC, he implemented the new economic strategy as an instrument of social re-engineering. Thus, maintaining social order by making social contract is important as it could ensure peace and harmony within the Federation. Next, the social contract was established to entrench and protect the interests of the Malays with the intention of resolving the disadvantages that they face. Article 153 of the Federal Constitution grants the Yang di-Pertuan Agong responsibility for safeguarding the special position of the Malays and other indigenous people of Malaysia and the legitimate interests of all other communities. It specifies how the Agong may protect the interests of this group by establishing quotas for entry into the civil service, public scholarship, and public education. This social contract was institutionalized as a new economic policy, or NEP. Under the NEP, a major social restructuring plan was set up to establish more equitable development and redistribution between Malays and non-Malays to be accomplished in a 20-year time frame. The redistribution and restructuring approach aim both to abolish ethnic-based dominance of particular economic activities and to eradicate poverty regardless of ethnicity. From the non-Malay point of view, this essentially means an enforced sharing of resources with the Malays, since the NEP stated that Malays and other natives of the land, which is the Bumiputra, were to be allocated a quota of 30% by means of fair distribution of employment, business opportunities, and wealth. In the Malaysia Constitution, Article 153 is one of the most contentious articles. It is considered by critics to establish an unnecessary and discriminatory distinction between Malaysians of various ethnic backgrounds, since it has contributed to the adoption of policy of affirmative action that favor only the Bumiputra, who make up the majority of the population. Nevertheless, the criticism regarding Article 153 of the Federal Constitution still can't conceal the rationale of this article as it contributed to the development of our country.
I'm going to explain about the importances of social contract. So moving on, there are another two importance of social contract, which it provides identity to the country, and lastly, it is the main pillar of our federal constitution. So how can the social contract provide identity to our country? The first thing to further see this relevance between social contract and identity of Malaysia is by looking back at the history of Malaysia. During the era of British colonization, British has established the divide and rule policy, and thus has divided the economic sector and residents according to races. For example, Chinese were mostly dominated the commerce and construction field and live in city areas, while Malays were mostly related to farming and reside in rural areas, and the Indian provided the labor for the plantations. As a result, for this divide and rule policy, it has terminated the connection between these races, and thus has led to the dissatisfaction feelings in the races. Of disputes and conflicts arises, and the worst is the rise of communists, mostly because of the dissatisfaction feelings from the unfair treatment of British government. Thus, in order to overcome this problem, a lot of alternatives were taken by the race-based parties in Malaya, that is UMNO, MIC and MCA, realizing the importance of unity of the races and in making a constitution for the independent of Federation of Malaya. All of the leaders from these three major parties has decided to do several things that are vital to the country's stability. So these decided things that was agreed by these three parties is called a social contract. When social contract has been agreed by all of these parties, the Malays were known as citizens of Malaya, and since then all of the people, regardless of what colors they are, is known as our family members. Thus, we can see that one of the importance of this social contract is it provides identity to our country as a multiracial country. Because of this identity came by our country, it actually has given benefits to the country, especially in the economic sector, as this identity is one of the tourist attractions to Malaysia.
Next, besides giving a new identity, social contract is also vital to our country as it is the main pillar of federal constitution. According to the scholars, the existence of social contract has greatly brought impact to our constitution and indirectly affected the making of the constitution. One of the main effects of the social contract is granting citizenship to the non-Malays, and this right of the citizenship has been laid down in Part 3 of the federal constitution, which consists of Article 14 until Article 18 of the Act. Malaysia has given citizenship to the non-Malays who live in Malaysia before and after the independence, and it is proven when our former Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad posted in his blog that since the era of gaining the independence, Malaysia has granted citizenship about 1 million to the non-indigenous. Besides that, this article also has provided citizenship to stateless individuals in the country, and it also helps refugees from others to seek for shelter in our country. This action taken by the government in granting citizenship to the non-indigenous and stateless people has led to a lot of problem solving in matters regarding the refugees and many more, and this has been praised by the UN Refugee Agency. However, in order to avoid any issue arising, to grant a citizenship to the non-Malays, it still needs to be complied with the restriction and requirements provided under Article 14 until Article 18 of the Federal Constitution. Thus, the granting of citizenship to the non-Malays is very important to be governed in the Supreme Law, because if only it did not affect the making of the federal constitution, it will probably arise conflicts and misunderstanding in our country nowadays, as the Malays and the Bumi Putra will likely feel like they were the only people who are entitled to the status of Malaysia's citizen. Besides that, it also may corrupt the unity between the races which has been built all of this time.
I will explain about one of the challenge in honoring social contract in Malaysia and the way to overcome that challenge. One of the challenge in honoring social contract in Malaysia is that some people understand or interpret the contents of the social contract differently and incorrectly. So why does this situation happens? It happens because some people interpret the social contract according to their own preferences and without looking into it as a whole. Example to explain this situation is that there are people that argue about Islam being the religion of the Federation as stated in Article 3 of the Federal Constitution. However, they fail or refuse to look at the whole provision, which also mentions that other religions or beliefs can still be practiced in peace and harmony. Besides, there are people who think that the social contract is less important, and they doubting the contributions of the social contract in forming the multiracial communities in Malaysia that we are living in today. Lastly, some people either misunderstood or not even know certain facts of the history. For example, there are people who think that the constitution and social contract were drafted by the Malay rulers and its aim was to preserve the rights of the Malay only. Because of this misunderstanding, it affects their interpretation of social contract. One of the ways to overcome this challenge is that the citizens need to learn to be responsible, mature and open-minded. They need to be responsible by seeking the knowledge from the experts before making any assumptions or judgment towards certain issues. And after seeking for the knowledge, the person needs to be mature and open-minded to accept the truth even though it does not parallel with their opinions. In addition, people need to be responsible whenever they share or circulating any information, especially when it relates to the history of our country. They need to make sure that the information is correct. Incorrect information may lead to conflict and provocation. Provocation towards different races, either online or offline, need to be stopped since it will affect the peace of Malaysia, and this is against the aim of the social contract. Lastly, the people need to be mature and open-minded to have a deep and serious conversation or discussion on the issues relating to the social contract. A healthy discussion will give more input or benefit, especially for the person who is not understand anything about the social contract.
The second challenge is the gap between races. These challenges can be divided into three factors, which is political, economy, and social factors. Firstly, in the context of political issue, the purpose of social contract would be challenged if there is a practice of racial politics in our country. Race-based parties may inflame the feeling of racism in citizens' mind and thought. Plus, it also may split the majority ethnic in Malaysia, as they will keep supporting the politician or parties from their own races in order to fulfill their own desire. For example, there are different views regarding the ratification of ICIT to Article 153 of Federal Constitution. Some might think that the ratification of ICIT may challenge the Article 153 of FC, as it will contradict with the content in it. However, there are some arguments that ICIT was solely to discard the racial discrimination in the country. Thus, here people would love to support the politician which have the same views with them. In other words, it also can become one of the key factors which can block the mission of social contract, which is to unite everyone in the country. Next, in the context of economy, the gap can be seen through the statistic of ethnic inequality and poverty in Malaysia. For example, during the independence, Malaysia was facing a major problem regarding the inequality of income and poverty between the major ethnic groups. Hence, the new economic policy NEP was being established in order to promote the national unity and reduce the poverty towards all. Approaching to 2017, the gap between each races was able to be narrowed by the NEP. Nevertheless, the success to narrow the gap does not mean that the matter of inequality was being settled completely. The statistics shown that in 2019, ethnic Chinese household had the highest mean monthly household income in Malaysia, followed by the Bumiputra, which less 2,500 ringgit than the Chinese household. Hence, it's shown that although the Article 153 of the Federal Constitution intended to ensure the Malays and natives of Sabah and Sarawak are not being neglected for their rights and interests, but the matter of different income for races should still be improved. In other words, to reach the level of equality which can satisfy each and every races in Malaysia was very hard to be achieved. Last but not least is through social factor. It will occur when there is no unity between races in Malaysia, including the Malays, Chinese, Indian and natives. There are still exists the feeling of dominance of their own races only. This feeling of dominance becomes stronger when their daily activities or interaction with other people only involve the people with same races or belief with them. For example, usually at the university or academic institution, the students tend to be friends or spend time with people with the same ethnic and races with them. They think that they can easily understand each other because of the same historical background, foods or culture. Plus, the statistics showed that more than 60% of Malays sees themselves as Muslims first before a Malay. Moreover, the research that we done through Google Forms shows that at around 10% still love to get along with people from same races, even though majority love to have multiracial friends. However, this kind of thought is not right because in order to ensure the unity of all the races in Malaysia, we need to put ourselves as a Malaysian first. When we consider ourselves as a Malaysian first, rather based on religion or races, we can erase the feeling of gap and difference between each and another. Hence, in order to develop the feeling of unity and love towards the country, the amalgamation of the vernacular schools in Malaysia into one united Grand National School could be done. Here, different types of school will be administered under one system. The students can mingle with people from different races. Thus, we can instill the feeling of patriotic and love towards all races in Malaysia. If we are able to change the way of young people think towards the social contract, hence we might be able to develop a more united country which is able to represent Malaysia in a good way.
Now, we already reached the conclusion part, which is the end of the slide. We will recap back our discussion when in the first part of the discussion, we talk about importance and advantages that communities in Malaysia can acquire from social contract, which are the development of the identity of the country and stabilization of the economy. Thus, we can conclude that establishment of social contract allow us to achieve peace and harmony in our society. Meanwhile, in second part, we talk about challenges and ways to overcome. Some challenges are false or mislead interpretation of the constitution and social contract, and also gap between races. We need to instill ourselves with knowledge of the social contract and the history behind it, so that we do not misconcept the social contract itself. So I think that's all from me. Thank you.